Welcome everybody. This is our first panel with the nominees for our very first BFE Cut Above Awards. We're starting tonight with the nominees for the Best Edited Drama Series. And I wanted to say, to list all the actual nominees, because obviously these are shows that are edited by more than one person, most of the times. So I just wanted to say the names of all the nominees, if that's okay. So we have I May Destroy You. We have with us Christian Sandino-Taylor here to talk to us. But the team also was, part of the team were also Lindsey Woodward, who's also up for an award for the Chris Krukel Awards, actually. Then Mike Phillips, Amy Hounsell, John Dwelly.
Yep, Dwelly.
Guy Bensley. They're all nominated for the awards for I May Destroy You. Then nominated is Small Axe. We have here Chris Dickens with us, and with Steve McQueen, he edited the whole show. Then Normal People is nominated. We have Nathan Nugent.
Nugent. Is that all right?
That one. And with him, Stephen O'Connell is nominated for the awards. And then we have with us Michelle Tesoro, who all on her own edited Queen's Gambit. So welcome you four for now, taking the lead for this event, because otherwise would have been really hectic. So as to break the ice, I'd like for you to introduce your own show, because I find that quite interesting to see how you from the inside see the show. So I don't know, let's go in the order that I had the awards listed. I May Destroy You. Christian, please.
Yeah, I May Destroy You. It's a 12-part, half-hour episodic drama about, well, it's ostensibly about the fallout from this sexual assault this young writer experiences, but doesn't remember. She's drugged. And then the fallout in her own sort of life and amongst her friends. And then from that sort of incident, it spins off into a sort of discussion about consent and truth and the multiplicity of truths and our own personal truths. And also, I suppose, about how we use, I mean, Arabella, the main character writer, how we use art to process trauma and you know, yeah, process trauma. That'll do.
Then let's go to Small Axe. So Chris.
Oh God, how can I describe Small Axe?
That's a hard one, actually.
So Small Axe is, yes, I suppose different to a lot of things, and it's actually a series of separate films, separate stories, but they're all around one theme, which is like true stories, essentially about the West Indian or community in London from about late 60s through to mid 80s. Only one of them isn't really a true story, and that's Lovers Rock, which is but it's sort of based on Steve's auntie, I think, who actually went to a party and met her husband there or something. So it's sort of based on a true thing, but all the others are real stories, true stories about real people. So that's all I can say, really. Sort of a series of 5 standalone films, really, but form part of a series.
Thank you. And then Normal People, Nathan.
Normal People, also a 12-part miniseries for BBC and Hulu, 12 half hours. It's based on the Sally Rooney book from 2018, also called Normal People, and it follows the relationship of 2 young people who are just finishing secondary school, and follows that relationship and the effect those 2 people have on each other all the way through to the end of university. It's told primarily through both characters' perspectives and rarely breaks away from that. Directed by Lenny Abramson, who also exec produced, and Hetty MacDonald was the other director on it as well. And as you said, myself and Stephen O'Connell were the editors on the series.
Next one, cheers. And then last, Michelle, last amendment.
I edited The Queen's Gambit. It is based on a Walter Tevis novel of the same name about a young girl, a young orphaned girl who becomes who is a chess prodigy, and it's about her road to becoming a grandmaster. It's based in the 50s, 60s, so it's a period piece, and just the challenges she faces, not only as a woman in the chess world, but also someone with an addiction problem. So, and it was me and my 2 assistants that cut the show.
Nice one. Thank you for that. That was great. Better than I could have done it. So there you go. So the first real question, I wanted to know in terms of these teams of edit, and for you, Michelle, obviously with your assistants, and also how you did it on your own. How did you technically and also, I guess, philosophically divided the work between each of you, and or did you do different parts of an episode? Obviously for small acts, maybe that might have worked also a bit differently. So it would be interesting to know how each of your teams kind of worked in team. So the order, we keep the same order or whatever, whoever wants to speak first.
Sure, I don't mind. I mean, ours was a kind of ever-expanding team. So I think Amy was the last to join, and she joined probably halfway through the fine cut to do it. I think she's cut episodes 8 or 9. I'm sorry if it's one of those two. So ours, basically, during the assembly, there were, I think, at one stage, 5 of us cutting, and we hadn't at that stage been officially given episodes. And what happened was they basically realised that to hit the schedule properly, we were going to have to get more editors, which is why the team expanded. And yeah, so when we got, it was a bit chaotic for a brief while whilst we were sort of. I remember one afternoon I was given episode 3, and then an hour later I was given episode 1. I mean, it was a bit like that for a week or two, but then we just about. I mean, the stress of that is you know we're all assembling on stuff we might not fine cut. And so luckily it worked out that I think we all had just about enough time when we finally were given our episodes to work out, to get to know the footage and to do a pass ourselves. So that by the time Sam and Michaela came in, you know, we each knew our footage. But it was yeah, there was a lot of cross-pollination, which is quite nice because you inherit stuff, which is great. With an idea you wouldn't have had, and sometimes you know you'd find a scene. I remember having a scene and going to see John, who'd originally assembled it, and I think Mike had then sort of put it together into an episode, and then I fine cut it. And at one stage I could go into John because I'd seen a really early cut he'd done of that scene, a sort of alternate cut. I could steal 20 seconds from that, and you know, so it was quite an interesting sort of start, and then it became a sort of fairly normal fine cut, although it was very it was such a tricky, nuanced show that there was a lot of, more than ever I've experienced, a lot of conversation between us. You know, it was really nice. You'd sort of pop into each other's room and ask each other's advice. You know, what do you think this is about? Where do you think the emphasis is? You know, where do you think where should this scene lie? You know, a lot of that. So it was, and all very different people. The editors were very different people. So it was a really rich, collegiate. It was a great experience. Very uncompetitive, very supportive, and you know, lots sort of six brains bashing together.
So I take it back then you were all in the same sort of place, all the editors, or? Yeah,
initially, yeah, basically. I mean, we you know, a bit like Michelle, we finished off. I think the last, I sort of fine cut. I'd cut 3 episodes. The last 2, I think I finished at home. So we were sort of fine cutting just as lockdown happened here in the UK. And yeah, I think actually we missed out. I think it, you know, although it was fine, you know, cutting from home and finishing was fine, because by then I think we'd all found our rhythm and we all trusted each other, and etc. etc. But especially on that show, you know, there were so many things you wanted to discuss, you know, to try and improve, that we stopped doing that. You know, we just didn't do it on Zoom because you don't nipped down for a coffee and stuff, and that was a shame. And I think that, I'm not saying it harmed the show, but it was one of the strengths of our collaboration, I think, whilst we were in the same place.
Yeah, it's quite particular way of working, like not being in blocks. I thought you would have done kind of blocks.
It was kind of like that at the beginning, but then it just became increasingly clear we couldn't hit the delivery dates if we worked like that. So I mean, the real Trojan was Michaela, who is basically at one stage is going between 6 edit suites. I mean, incredible, precise, focused, brilliant, trusting, all those great things. I mean, I think that was the worry. We're like, how would she possibly do that? Because we all needed her clarity on what we were trying to achieve. But she was just ridiculous. She was amazing. She'd pop in. Can I have you? Yeah, mate. Yeah. Give me 2 minutes. It was good.
Great. Who was next in the list? Relax. Chris.
Okay, I think. God. Okay, so believe it or not, a Small Axe didn't have a massive budget to start with, and so we didn't have a lot of editors or like the resources to. But I started late after they'd actually shot the whole of Mangrove, so which was like sort of 2 months of shooting or something like that. And this was a long time. This was not last year. This was the year before. Mm-hmm. So summer the year before they shot that, and I started, and so I had to cut. I did a sort of first cut of that I had an assistant on it as well, Nicola, who helped me with that. But essentially I had to cut. I edited that whilst they were shooting Lovers Rock, so sort of simultaneously, and so it became very that was how the series was. They shot everything separately. So they shot Mangrove, which was actually originally 2 episodes of a TV series, but we later joined them together to make one film. So they shot that first, then they shot Lovers Rock, then they shot Red, White and Blue, then they shot Alex Wheatle, and they shot Education, the last one, all with just a week between the two. So that in a way made it much easier, because you could just divide your attention between each separate film. I'm doing this one, or I'm doing that one. But I at some point needed help, so I did have an editor, Richard Ketteridge, who edited Alex Wheatle, did the first cut of that whilst I was concentrating on another one. And then we would just have a little, session at the end of each week or whatever, and do notes. I would give him my notes, and then when we finished that, we would then show that to Steve. And so that's how the shoot worked. And then that, of course, we started doing the director's cut around January last year. That was it. Beginning of December the previous year. I can't believe this is so long, because the whole thing took us like 18 months or something to finish. So we did the director's cut in January, and then of course Steve lives in Amsterdam, so we went to, myself and my assistant George, we went to Amsterdam to work with him in February, but we were planning to work there for the entire director's cut. But of course in March we had to come home. We came home for the weekend, and then we never went back because of lockdown and all that. So we had to leave all our equipment in the entire 2 suites, the Nexus, everything had to be left in Amsterdam. And so Steve was left there with all that, with all of that equipment. So, but essentially what that meant is that we were working all in 3 separate places. And I'm sure all of you have had experience of this last year. So Steve was in Amsterdam, I was here in London, George was, I think, in South London, something like that, somewhere like, which is almost another country anyway. But so that's sort of how we worked, and we didn't really divide up the editing. I mean, because Steve was in Amsterdam, and because of the whole situation, we sent him edits. I sent him the cuts that I was working on. This is before we started working on Evercast, which was later when we were linked up properly, So I would send him edits, and then he would look at them and then give me notes, maybe do some stuff there, send it back, and then we would sort of combine the work. And that's how it worked. It happened for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and then we worked on Evercast for practically the entire time, which would have been from about beginning of April right through to July, August, when we actually did that, which was very, very difficult, I have to say, because we'd actually almost edited 2 of them, but we had to sort of do the entire director's cut like that, which was very, very difficult. But so then come July, we did pickups. So we did a whole week or 2 of pickups in London and Birmingham. So that what happened then is we came back, Steve came back to England, and in August we just started working as normal back in the studio, back in the edit, and then mixed. So that's basically it. I mean, not really any clear division, because they were all separate films. We just all worked on it at the same time. So that's kind of how it worked, really.
Nice. Thank you. Nathan?
So Normal People began shooting April 2019, the end of April, and I was just finishing another film at the same time, but took the crazy decision to keep assembling in the evenings and early mornings as it was being shot. So that was a bit of a nightmare. I did have an assembly editor, Greta Ola, who was working alongside me, but I realized it was the kind of show where I had to watch and kind of do cuts of everything myself as I was going along. It was the only way I was going to get to know the material in a short space of time as well. So so I mean, the one thing I found was, like, a lot of Normal People was edited on tubes and airplanes when I come home for the weekend, because I was working in London and then come back to Dublin a lot of weekends. So I'd use those in between times to kind of assemble a lot of the scenes. I was down to do initially the first block, which was episodes 1 to 6, and then Stephen would do episodes 7 to 12. But he would start later in the process. He was working with Hetty MacDonald, who's the other director on it. And it went well. The one thing we did was we decided not to lock episodes at all, to be honest with you, and just left the whole thing open. So we said, how much time are we allotted? Right, at this date, we'll hand over 6 episodes. So we kept throwing like network cuts to BBC and Hulu. But we tried to keep everything open, because we knew, as with a lot of shows, episode 1 gets a lot of attention, particularly the first few minutes of episode 1. So we left that open, kept coming back to it, trying different things, and I think that generally the first 6 episodes benefited from that approach, in that we could kind of allot certain periods of time to certain things to get them working better. So it was quite interesting. And then so Stephen came on board kind of just as we were starting to soft lock episodes, and he was going into a different kind of, it was interesting because the series is a kind of series of 2 halves. The couple at the center of the series are very much together in the first 6, and in the second 6 it's generally a darker story, so they spent a lot more time apart. So it was a different kind of vibe. And I mean, as the second 6 went on, there was a requirement based on schedule and so on that I kind of jump in a bit more. And with Lenny as a kind of exec producer, and having driven the initial scripts and stories and so on, there was a little bit of kind of overseeing of that as well. So it was tight, but it finished up just as the world was kind of locking down. The final mixes for the last 2 episodes and so on were being done in lockdown pretty much, and there were a few pickup scenes and reshoots that were being done just really on the cusp of that. So yeah, it was tight, but we just got there in the end. But yeah, it was open experience. As I say, it was unusual in that the series had a different personality really from the first episodes and as it moved forward. So there wasn't as much cross-pollination, but I suppose what there was a requirement to be true to the beginnings of their relationship as the series went on, and to kind of remind people of that where possible. Because it's not a plot-driven series. It really lives or dies on the believability of their relationship. That's the whole game in town, really, And Lenny is, like, first and foremost a feature film director. So it was unusual in that his initial block was felt like two films, actually. The first 3 episodes felt like a self-contained thing, and the second 3 felt like a self-contained thing as well. And that's kind of how we cut them. We did, it was unusual because like for Hulu, you'd have to be aware of a couple of ad breaks in the middle of that as well, and not for the BBC. So we really cut for the Beeb and then worked out backwards, let's, okay, if we have to, we'll put an ad break there, an ad break there, So yeah, it was really enjoyable. I mean, helped by 2 brilliant lead performances as well.
Yeah, very much. And Queen's Gambit, Michelle?
Oh.
Well, that's a bit of a different one, but yeah.
Well, it's interesting just listening to Nathan. It's similar in that, the reason that it ended up that I cut all of them, we did a similar thing on Godless, and it's because, they decide, well, Scott wanted to direct all of it. And so by nature of that, they were cross-boarding the whole shoot. So essentially you're making a 7-hour movie, which is what it is. So, and the way that the footage comes in, it's like, well, you have a little bit of 1 and a little bit of 5 and a little bit of this and that, and you're never completely having a whole episode by a certain time, a certain date. And I mean, the way that stuff really was able to work is just making sure that you can have the schedule that accommodates for everything to be open, still, and that you don't have to deliver episodes while you're still shooting or, still needing time for him being the director to look at all of the episodes. So it's sort of, there's a couple of things that Nathan was saying that I was like nodding at, like that was our experience in terms of, that's how we saw it and that's how we delivered it. And, we did a similar, basically we mirrored our schedule from Godless to the Queen's Gambit. So we all but assured that we didn't have to turn over episodes to Netflix until, I think we're doing it in March. Yeah. End of March. We're going to do the first 3, then the last 3, however it worked out for us. But we knew we would have all 6 ready. That's what it started out as, 6, for them to look at, in some form. So, but I mean, in terms of how the work was kind of broken out, and I did it differently than I did on Godless. Godless, I did truly assemble everything and then put everything together. But on this, I utilized my assistants a little bit more, just so it was more fun for everyone, including me. So what we would do this thing where, I mean, they were shooting in Germany, which was great because we would get the dailies so early. And we were in New York, Post is in New York. So the assistants would come in. I had one assistant that would come in the morning, and the other assistant would kind of come in later and cover the evening. So I had, an assistant from 6 a.m. to probably 8 or 9. And they would prep the dailies. And then so dailies and pull, my pull sequences, which is just an organized version of my dailies in script form. We would watch it. It would all be done by lunch. We'd have lunch leisurely. And then we'd come back into the room and watch all the dailies together. And I would make my selects according to, looking at the notes from the script supervisor, as well as just watching all of the takes and everything. And by the time we'd finish that little screening session, I would divide out the work. Oh, can you assemble this? You assemble this, and I'll do this big chunk or whatever, depending upon the complexity of what the scene was. Because if you remember, like in the show, there's a lot of these, oneers that are lined up next to each other that create, one sequence, and those are sort of easier to put together than, say, a tournament or a dialogue scene or whatever. So I tried to divide it where it was fair for them if they were interested in doing something more complex or not, depending upon how much work there was for them to do. And then we just did that every day for 82 days straight, which is how many shooting days we had. And then And then by the end of that, it was more, and this was still in the fall of 2019. So we started shooting in August and we finished sometime before Christmas. So we were very lucky in that our shooting wasn't interrupted by COVID related events or whatever. I think a week after they stopped shooting, we decided to we started putting things together, just making sure there wasn't anything missing, which we already knew as we were going along, to just look at all 6 episodes. And I love that moment of asking, okay, how long is it all? And the first assembly, I think it was 9 hours and 50 minutes or something. But it was all together. And along the way, what was great about it is we have, Scott doesn't like working with temp sound or temp music. So where there was already a composer on board, we had a music editor they were just starting in December, and also a sound editor mixer. So, the whole picture editorial team didn't have to worry about tracking per se. So that takes a load of work off of everybody's shoulders, which is how you can allow for something like this to happen, one team to do one whole thing. So by the time that Scott got in the room, which was maybe in January, I mean, the thing is in October, I decided I wanted to try this Evercast thing because I had heard a podcast about it. And I was like, oh, this might be a way where I don't have to fly to New York every time Scott wants to work with me, because I live in LA, and he flies me out and I spend a whole year out in New York. And I was like, oh, this would be cool if we could do this Evercast thing. So we had already tried it, and he was already like, oh, does that mean I can go to, he usually does a Sundance Lab in January, and he does all this other stuff where he doesn't want to actually come into the room. So we were already utilizing that in January while we were assembling his cut. There's never really my cut, I mean, there is and there isn't, but it's not officially created, and delivered as such. It's more of while I'm shooting, or while they're shooting, I'm sending the cuts as they're coming together so he can see how it's coming together and respond to it. And if he needs to pick something up, he can do that because he's looking at while it's shooting, because it's a really long time before you see anything, an episode cut together. You almost don't have any time to go back and do pickups. So he sort of sees it really broken along the way. And then once he's in the room, we kind of go from the beginning, from episode 1. And at that point, it's just me and him, and where we're looking at the episodes in order, because he doesn't really like to pop to all the other episodes at the same time. He likes to just focus on the one, move on, focus on and move on. So that's kind of how it was. And I think by the time, in March, at the beginning of March, we scheduled to binge the first 3. If the producer had wanted to wait, if he could have waited another 2 weeks, we would have binged all of the episodes. But he was really kind of eager to see how the first 3 episodes were shaping up. So we just sat in one room with everybody, meaning producers, which is just Scott and Bill, the sound team, picture editorial, music, and we watched it all together like a binge. And that gives us a lot of ideas, and to then go back and do his cut. But that's officially his director's assembly. And so we did that March 6th. So, obviously after that, we all had to go into lockdown. And we were only doing things by picks. But I think what makes it easier, what made that whole experience easier, was the fact that we all had worked together before. There really wasn't this, the idea of having to trust, it was already there. So it just made it really easy. You didn't have to question if you were seeing things or not seeing things, whatever, and by that time, Scott had already basically done a pass on everything. It was just, we were just in the middle of our second pass. So, so yeah, that's sort of how we did it.
Thank you so much. I will try and ask at least one sort of a couple of specific questions per show. I may destroy you. My first question is actually a bit more of a curiosity of mine than a properly technical one. I don't know if you guys have watched the show, if you noticed. I didn't at first, and then I read about it. That I think it's episode 6 where there is the big shadow of Arabella on top in the bedroom on top of the closet that looks at you, and it's the creepiest thing possibly I've ever seen. And when I noticed, like when I read about it, I went back and watched it, and I'm like, oh my god, how did I miss that? Like, and I couldn't stop rewatching it. I don't know, it was crazy. And I just wondered if there's any other like that I haven't read about, like sort of Easter eggs like that spread it around the show.
The first, well, maybe. I mean, the first shot of the show, the first thing you see, something Michaela and I put in, it wasn't in the script, is the shot of her bedroom and all of the post-it notes on the wall, and then it cuts into Italy and the story starts. And I think if you're watching the show, you would forget it because it doesn't link to the next thing. It's not particularly surreal. It's not intending to trick you. It is expressly designed so that when and if you watch it again, you start to ask the question of, you start to see this is both Arabella and Michaela doing the same thing, using experience to create narrative to deal with this thing, this trauma. So I suppose that's one that comes to mind. In terms of like symbols and metaphor, Michaela's packed the show with them, and I haven't had the time to nor the brain power to go through, but I mean, I think there's lots of interviews, if you track them down with her, she'll explain, you know, a lot of the symbology she created for it. But that's the one that we sort of collaborated on that comes to mind.
And this one, the shadow thing, how did that came out? Like, was that in post or?
Oh, you're asking the wrong editor, I'm afraid. I saw it like you for the first time when I saw the show. I don't know. I'd imagine it was as simple as split screening. Split screening her. But I mean, it's a brilliant thing, isn't it? It's a brilliant moment.
It's just brilliant, yeah. I just loved it. But I really didn't see it. Like, I completely was surprised when I went back and watched it. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
But as you obviously touched on Michaela, and she's like the genius. I think she's the next Phoebe Allen-Bridge for me. Because obviously she's written the show, she produced it as well and directed half of it or something like that.
I think co-directed. I can't remember how the credits actually come out, but I think she and Sam officially says they co-directed 9. But I imagine, I mean, I wasn't on set, but I imagine it was as collaborative as it could be, given that she's acting, you know, 80% of the scenes.
Yeah, of course, and she's acting, obviously. Yeah. But so I read that she said that she chose BBC because that would she would keep more control over her show. How did that translate? Her being, you know, all these figures in the show translated into having her in the edit, and obviously you already said how she was on it, but a bit more in depth. How was it to work with her, and how was this control translated into the edit suite?
Pretty seamlessly. I mean, in terms of our relationship with HBO and BBC, they were both great. You know, it was full backing. So they signed up to what the show actually was, rather than, you know, sometimes you get into the nitty gritty and you realize they imagine a different show. But in this case, they were very much behind it and behind her. So in terms of our relationship with them, that was brilliant. You know, they were very helpful, smart notes. We had brilliant execs, Phil Clark and Roberto Troni from Val, who you know, have a long relationship with Michaela, and also very great keepers of what the sort of soul of the show. And then with her, I mean, just speaking from a personal point of view, I suppose, is you know, the difficult thing when we were assembling was kind of production kept us quite separate from Michaela, because she had so much on her plate. You know, she's acting and co-directing and then rewriting at night. And then, you know, the many difficulties you have, you know, huge pickups, reshooting scenes, etc., etc. So we didn't really get to speak to her very much during the assembly. So, I mean, from my point of view, it was more a case of just getting, you know, I guess it's the same with everyone when you're starting a relationship with a director, you know, is understanding her philosophy, understanding how she sees the world, you know. And a lot of that sometimes for me is just informal conversations. It's just, you know, I'm an editor who likes to chat. You know, I like to talk. I like to, you know, sometimes just sharing stories about your life or the world. Obviously, you talk about the scripts and what's in front of you, but sometimes those other conversations can be equally useful, because you're basically getting to grips with the sort of the human you're trying to please. So for me, from my point of view, as soon as I got her sense of taste, what she's trying to do creatively, the sort of the philosophy behind her drama, then it was not easy, but it was like, okay, I know what she wants broadly, so now I can just try to please her, you know, to surprise her. But a lot of it comes out of those conversations, and sometimes they're, you know, they're really on the nose. They're like, you know, what do we mean about this scene? What are we trying to do here? Why? What are we trying to achieve with this music or no music, etc. But sometimes it's about talking about single parent families, and you start talking about that, you start talking about and then you've wasted an hour. You think you've wasted an hour, but actually you've maybe got closer to knowing that person, and then that, if you know, that is also the show, you know, especially when something's semi-autobiographical. But funny enough, we wouldn't, you know, often I don't think I ever asked her about biographical details within the show. I don't think we ever sat there and went, you know, so some of the stuff we were dealing with is traumatic, you know, stuff that she experienced. And, you know, the edit suite, as we all know, is a kind of, what's it, a priest hole or whatever. It's a safe space. But even then, you know, you have to, if you're dealing with something that personal and that, what's the word, tender, you know, we wouldn't need to discuss things like that often. You know, sometimes a conversation would be purely technical about some of those scenes. But yeah, it was a lot of conversations. And she, I mean, if you've ever listened to any of her interviews or podcasts, the many she's given, she's so smart and so forensic and clear. That's what you're dealing with. So you're not dealing with, you know, you're dealing with someone who can give you an answer and who thinks deeply about an answer, and also is unafraid to come back the next day and go, I was wrong about that. I think it's this. And that's a real strength, I think, of any creative person. You know, it wasn't about ego with her. It was just about the work. And she was living it. I mean, she was, you know, sometimes I say to her, listen, I'm sorry, I'm going to send you a cut, but it's going to be like at 11 o'clock at night. Do you mind? And she's like, don't you dare say that. It's fine. And so I get a set of notes at 3 a.m. and she'd be in the next day at sort of 8:30 looking alert, you know, amazing, truly amazing achievement, I think. And I imagine the rest of the editors would say the same thing, you know, because she's such an interesting person. You kind of want to buttonhole her anyway, you know, just sitting having a chat. Michaela's just food to me. It's great, you know. But with great reluctance, another editor would knock on the door and I'd have to let her go on. But it was basically like that. And, you know, Sam, co-director, I think, you know, very smartly, he would be there to sort of keep us on track and to, you know, and his opinion was always great, you know, but it was also, we were all very aware that it was we were there to bring out Michaela's vision. So he did that graciously and brilliantly, because again, I mean, if he'd been an egotist about it, it would have been a fucking nightmare. But it wasn't. He was as soon as he saw how that she had it all under control, he was just there to sort of gently just make sure we don't fuck up. And I remember one stage I had a music cue, and he finally says, what did he say? Something rude. He just said this shit. And he was right. But it's, in general, she is all the things you would hope her to be.
You're a hero.
yeah. And she's also humble and a very, very, very good collaborator. I mean, it's what we were saying before we started this whole conversation. We all gained each other's trust very quickly, and she was able to dance between rooms, give us sets of notes, and trust us to carry them out and allow us to try different things. I never felt like I couldn't be so she'd give me a note and I go, okay, yes, but what about this? She was always open to that. And that meant that when we went into lockdown for the fine cut, we'd already had that sort of trust going throughout all of the editors. But yeah, you wouldn't be disappointed if you ever worked with her. She's brilliant.
I bet. Okay, thank you so much for that. Chris, you're next. A bit of an obvious question, but I think is the most interesting thing about these films for me. But first of all, yeah, how did you treat each film differently? I feel like even more how you said the process, that you were kind of just going from one to the other quite quickly. You didn't have time to just have a break. What did you see? How was each film different from the other for you?
Well, I suppose firstly, Steve had he's not really like other directors, Steve McQueen. He's very he's sort of interested in different things, and a lot of the time he's interested in the atmosphere of something, or a shot that looks beautiful, or he's looking for a sort of special sort of quality, I think, in terms of what he's shot, not necessarily just story. But so all of the films had a slightly different emphasis. So I had to sort of, obviously, as Christian was saying, I'd never worked with Steve before. I knew his films, but I had to sort of get inside his head a little bit. And during the shoot, he came in a lot, each day or every day almost. But they were all very different in that, but it all came from the story. So, essentially, for instance, Lovers Rock was, I worked on it for a bit, and I read, the script was amazing, but it really didn't bear much resemblance to the actual finished film in many ways, even though it you can describe what music's playing, but it's not the same as hearing it. And I was, was cutting it, and I said to Steve, well, look, so there's music. So we've got music in this, and then we have no music at the beginning. There's nothing being played in the film. When they put the music on, the guys set up the sound system for the party. We hear music right to the end. Is that right? Right to the end of the film without any break. He said, well, I don't know whether he decided that or not, but he said, well, yes. I said, oh, okay, right. So that gave me the clue. And then he said, what we're making here is a musical. We're not making a kind of conventional kind of story, although the story is very simple. It has very sort of, simple sort of beats in it and stuff. But so with Lovers Rock, I could talk forever about all of the individual films, but I'll talk more generally. Lovers Rock was, what we then started doing was looking for that sort of, thinking of it in that way, but not like a normal musical where people get up and sing songs. This was about a reality. We were creating a reality, but it was still like a musical. It was driven by the music. It never stopped, even when the DJs swap records. There's that they put sound effects on between each record whilst they're changing it. So there's never a break, essentially. And also that allowed us to look for different things and essentially Steve was, I had sort of cut it too tight and too short, essentially, because right from at the beginning it was intended, for TV, for BBC and stuff, but the scripts weren't written just to an hour or whatever it was. They were all like different lengths. Lovers Rock was about 45 pages long or 50 pages long, and I cut it too short, and Steve just said, make it longer, make it longer. And so that became a kind of a thing, I said, so you want how much longer? He said, well, just use everything I shot. And that was essentially, so I had to, with Lovers Rock particularly, that was what we were looking for. And I hope it does, hopefully it doesn't feel padded out, but that was what we did. And so if you go to that was essentially what was going on with that one. With Mangrove, it was a totally different story. So the approach was different, but also it was a story in two parts. So of course you had the first part, which was originally the first episode, and then the second part. And the first part was like basically the origins of a demonstration that they were demonstrating about the police harassment, and that turned into a sort of riot, whatever. And then the second half was the courtroom sort of drama. And so the approach was totally different. The first half was more chaotic, cut more quickly, more with less precision in a way. And the second half, when they got to the courtroom, was more formal. He shot it that way. He didn't shoot an awful lot. Steve doesn't shoot a lot of material. He sort of shoots what he likes. But the second half had kind of less cover, weirdly, even though we were in a courtroom. And so, but it was formal, and it was about, essentially what it was about. What there was the story, but essentially what this was, the theme of it was about the state against this group of people, the defendants, the Mangrove Nine. And it was about state sort of sponsored racism, whatever you want to call it, state sort of like whatever you may call it. But essentially that was what we did in the second half. So everything, the cutting was more formal, the shooting was static without the camera moving much, except in key areas. So of course that was what we did. And also our use of music was sort of a little different. The first half was more like source music, second half was more score became more sort of part of the sort of fabric of it. But briefly, I could talk for too long, we haven't got time, but they were all different. Like Red, White and Blue, which was the third one, was again, we had a lot of difficulty with that one because essentially because the story wasn't a complete story. It was a sort of unfinished, and that was kind of the idea, but essentially we wrestled with it a lot, and particularly wrestled with whether to put music on it or not. And I always thought we needed a score on it to drive the emotion or the kind of that part of it more. And we tried things, but in the end Steve said no, because this is about truth. In that, a lot, in this particular situation where a police officer who's being like a victim of racial abuse from other officers in the force and all, that's a true story, and it's not the whole story, and it's unresolved. And he said, this is about truth. I don't want to color it up with anything out outside of that. So that was something we did with that. And then the other two, the last one, Education, is because it's shot on 16mm. They're all shot on different formats, by the way. So of course that gave them a different feel. Mangrove is 2perf 35, so it's like widescreen. Red, White and Blue was regular 35, 185, I think, and then Lovers Rock was digital. But Education was shot on 16mm, and it was more handheld. So of course the cutting took on that. A lot of the time the cutting is dictated by the way it's shot anyway, so because it's handheld, it meant there's less, you could just be more fluid with it, jump cuts, this kind of thing. But again, that the approach with that was again quite sparse in terms of music and things, and there were, I think we only used one or two bits of music that weren't actually score. There was no real score in it. It was just source music, and And what else? I mean, yes, and so they all had a slightly different approach, but of course they're all directed by the same person. So of course he's got similar sensibilities. But you know, the one overriding thing is I had to learn to hold shots for longer, because Steve likes to hold things, and that's like, you know, and I learned from that. I learned, because of course it's like, you get a lot from it. You can perhaps get more from that sometimes, and cutting quickly and but yeah, in simple, that's the, yeah, we can talk more in detail, but that's, yeah.
You kind of answered my actual obvious question, was the one about music. You touched on it pretty much everywhere. Obviously on Lovers Rock as the
Yeah.
most, you know, biggest example. But so did you, for all that great tracks that you have, mostly, I mean, I remember mostly Mangrove and Lovers Rock in terms of songs, because I loved ska. But did you have someone who researched, like, did you have those songs before? How did that work with all the tracks?
Some of them, yeah. Like, well, for instance, Lovers Rock was sort of planned. They had to, not all of them, but they had to clear the songs that were on camera, like Kunta Kinte Rock, which is the one where they all go crazy at the end, and then Silly Games, that beautiful track where they sing along. But not all of them. Like the track where the guys set up the sound system. I love that, and that wasn't cleared, but they used it anyway. But then there was a lot of other stuff, like, so I put on background stuff when they're outside, and at the end of the film, of course, the music does stop when they leave the party, but of course we have other music there. So that was stuff we used in the edit. We chose in the edit, some of which they'd cleared, some of which they hadn't, you know. And so we built, but when I knew that the music didn't stop, I just used everything I could find. And then Steve was uncompromising. There were a lot of tracks like that we couldn't have, Get Toots and the Maytals. They said, you can't have that, you're not clearable. And Steve said, well, I want it. Yeah. And he got it. And then, you know, others like Mangrove is like, that was more like we picked that in the edit, really, essentially, apart from the end music and some of the stuff. And I mean, you talk about ska, but like that, the track in the middle where the kind of sequence in the courtroom, which is cut to Skinhead Moon Stomp, which is like that is a sequence that came about organically, because I said to Steve, what are we doing with that? He said, well, I don't ever do this, but I want you to do a sort of montage thing with it. And I sort of rolled my eyes and thought, oh God, I want to do a montage. I said, but what are we going to use then? How are we going to do it? He said, just use everything. That's what he said, use everything. So I used everything, and I thought, I said, well, what music? He said, I don't know. But I think he knew, really. But I put a ska on it because I just instinctively thought it needed ska because I like the beat. And then Steve watched it and said, well, that's really interesting. You've used ska, and I hadn't really registered it. He said, well, why don't we use this track? And of course, Skinhead Moonstomp is perfect because it's like it's not actually a racist track, but of course skinheads are associated with racism, and so then we're using that on a sequence which is about a courtroom and the state again, all back to those themes. And of course that's where, you know, that's how Steve is kind of quite brilliant in like doing that. And he we're talking about music a lot, but that's essentially, he did a lot of that, you know. I would come forward with things. He likes you to come forward with ideas, and then he'll either reject them or build on them and stuff. And he was very, very good at that. And that's a very good example of how something develops in the edit, you know.
Thank you. And well, you hope that people who watches that and gets interested in the music will do their research and know that.
Yeah, exactly. I keep getting asked for playlists from that. From that one.
Anyway, that's really a conversation. Right. I could go on for 17 hours, but fine. Thank you so much. Nathan, let's go on, because see, it's already an hour. We'll never make it.
We'll keep it short.
Yeah. Well, if you're happy to stay, I'm sure everybody will be happy to stay longer, obviously. So on Normal People, it's such an intimate show, and it's really, as you said, it's all about them too and their story and how believable that is, and how you manage to get the emotion on the screen rather than, I mean, obviously there's a story, and it's a story of how no matter what you do, you will end up being together. It's kind of, I can see a lot of serendipity in this show. How did you how did you do that in the edit? Like, and also, you know, you kind of jump around in time quite a bit, not so much back and forth, but just back a few years and then forward a few years, sorry, and then again a few years, and they lost each other, and you start an episode and it's like, oh, okay, they haven't seen each other for a while. And how do you get that emotion back on track straight away with them two? How did you work, you and Stephen worked on that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because actually it's, I mean, I think one of the successes of the series, down to how it was directed and performed, is a lot of people feel it's quite true to the book in terms of how the book made them feel. And actually, that was something I was very conscious of. How did the book make you feel? But I read the book like literally as it was being released, and I never touched it again, because I thought, you know, we're not making a facsimile. This is a TV series, it has to be its own thing. And interestingly, so Sally would have developed a lot of the early scripts with Lenny. And I know a thing for her and Lenny was to actually make the story more linear than it appeared in the book. So, and that was quite an interesting thing, because it was more letting it live or die on its natural evolution. And as editors, I think it's great, you know, we're often in situations where we have to break things up and turn a story non-linear to actually get to the point of the story, you know what I mean? And
yeah,
I think we've all been in different situations where we've used those tools. But actually, what was interesting was, even then, once those scripts had been locked and went into production, very early on, even from assembly stage, I was feeling, you know, we need to make this even more linear where possible early on, because actually we just didn't need to lean on those devices, particularly for the first 3 episodes. It's pretty much a straight arrow, you know, and that was, I don't know whether it was the pressure of TV schedules and so on, but it was a conclusion myself and Lenny came to very, very quickly. Actually, I think that got in the way of where you wanted to be next. Just ditch it. And like episode 3 started in the future, they'd just broken up, and episode 2 they'd just really gotten together. But actually we got rid of that, and so episode 3 is pretty much a direct pickup from where episode 2 left off, you know. So there's all those kinds of decisions. I think Lenny had, interestingly, particularly for his 6 episodes at the beginning, got the writers to write them long. So for half hours he got them, some of the scripts are coming in at 39, 40 pages, 41 pages, because he just knew from our experience of working together, the most interesting edits are when we lose things, when we lose huge sections. You get those interesting elliptical jumps, and he didn't want to be in a situation where we were bound by delivery. You know, the delivery was open. Some episodes are quite short, but he just wanted to know he could do a good 30 and still lose some good material, because like to force our hand a little bit. And I thought that was a really interesting decision for this, because it put more pressure on him in shooting terms. He would still have to shoot those scenes, and the first cuts would be long, but it would push us to kind of get to a place where we go, yeah, isn't it interesting to just lose? And it meant we could lose some things that we just felt were unnecessary. It's not that they weren't good scenes, it's just they got in the way. So so yeah, like, you know, I think the key thing was to hone in on the kind of harmonics and frequency of their relationship and keep that alive throughout, really. And I don't think they got in the way of that or felt perfunctory or normal, just got rid of. So it was always a case of, you know, their relationship is a bit of a mystery, and not just because they're kind of 2 kids from different sides of the tracks. It's actually just a mystery. What brings them together? Like, in theory, they've been in school for like 6 years. Why now? And why these 2 people? And so it was all those things that are unsaid were as important as the dialogue, to be honest with you. And there's a lot of, you know, the tempo of the episodes is pretty straight, you know what I mean? There's a lot of silence, and we used all of that, so we never felt compelled to stick the foot on the accelerator. It was like, if they're holding your attention within a scene and you're still interested in them, then let it breathe. And you know, how we used music in particular ways was just to accentuate that and to kind of hold the scene's hand in certain places. It was never to kind of drive things forward. So yeah, you know, again, I can't stress how important the chemistry was between the two leads. And it was one of those interesting situations where scene one, well, it was originally scene one, but it's where they meet in the kitchen at the beginning of episode one. That was the very first thing they shot. And I always think that's a really dangerous thing, because it's like first day of shooting is often just a warm up. And then all of a sudden it's like, you know, oh my God, it's the beginning of the whole series now, the very first scene they're shooting. But you could just tell between you were just watching the rushes and you were going, I'm really caught up in this. And then they just got better and better and better as they went on, you know. So it was really about, you know, kind of protecting those performances and not trying to step on them with your editing, if you know what I mean. Because being in situations where you can watch rushes and go, there's something really magical going on here, but you can step on it by doing a bad first cut and going, oh my God, where's all that interesting, you know, magic that I was watching in the rushes. And now for some reason, when we edit it in such a way, it's kind of died a bit. So it pushed me as an editor, it pushed me down a track that I've been going down further and further, and that my timeline looks an absolute mess. It's a disaster. But I try and protect people's performances as I go along now. So I've tried to back off from being too hard with how I cut now. I try and just go with an actor's tempo, and then several cuts down the line try and tighten it up. But my initial stages go, if they're good, if the performances are good, just try and help, like, ease my way into that, rather than going, oh, I know what to do here, you know what I mean? Which is probably what I was doing a lot when I was younger, thinking I knew best, but now I don't think that. So, so yeah, so I suppose all those things, you know, kind of fed into it.
And did you think that being Irish, obviously there's quite a bit of like small town culture.
Yeah.
And I guess Irish small town culture. You know, I am from an Italian small town. And, you know, I could see some similarities there as well.
Yeah.
But it's very different from, you know, London or whatever. How much did it help for you being Irish? And I think Stephen as well is Irish.
Yeah, Stephen's. Yeah, we're both from Dublin actually, and I mean Sligo's out the other side of the country, and it's quite rural, but I think it helped. But to be honest with you, I don't think nationality came into it, because the story was universal, and you know, I think it was a nice background to the story, but being Irish really wasn't important. I think, you know, it may have helped in some areas, but like, you know, there was a little bit of anxiety initially, because it was going to be screened in the States as well, around, you know, like the Irish version of the prom is called the Debs, like, and no one outside of Ireland knows it's called that. Like their version, the Irish version of the A levels is called the Leaving Cert. Those kind of things could just fly by, but actually it never came up once ever. Like no one ever went, I was lost in the terminology. I mean, and there's some, you know, Irish slang for sex is riding. So there's all those kind of things as well. But again, no, it didn't seem to affect anyone's interpretation of the show. So yeah, ultimately, I think it's anyone could tap into the, you know, once they were interested in the relationship, I think that was the key thing. The background was, you know, was true to the book and true to the story, but you could land that story in, you know, Midwest state in America, or, you know, in the north of England, and it'd be the same thing, I think.
Yeah, and it's so today, like everything, even the darkest things that happen in the show, no spoilers, are so now.
Yeah, and commonplace. Yeah.
And it's just so actual that it's really easy to feel for them. And thank you. So let's go into Queen's Gambit now. So I've been told that the sale of chessboards peaked after this show, apparently. So obviously that's not my question. You're muted, by the way, Michelle. Mute yourself in the meantime. But obviously you made some magic where you managed to make chess interesting and fun. How did you do that, basically? But in a bit of a better way. How did you balance to go in depth enough to please chess players but also keep it easy enough for, you know, people like us who never played as much, or at least not professionally like that.
I mean, I think it was like a real balance between everybody really concerned about it being cinematic, like from the get-go of Scott writing the scripts. He was like, I don't know, you know, they're really worried about it being cinematic, but, you know, I'm going to worry about it too. So everybody worried about it, like, you know, at all stages. And I think because of that, he really said, okay, well, these are all of our chess sequences, and how am I going to make each one different or not repetitive, or how do we have each one stick out, you know? And I you know, some of that, a lot of that was him just deciding we're not going to shoot the board, we're going to shoot their faces, or we're going to show some of the board and we're only going to show this part or something, you know. So by eliminations, like I just have this stuff to deal with, so how do I tell the story? Because we did struggle. I want to say in episode 1, there's a lot of chess that we took out just because it was just too much chess. You know, there's only so much that you want to watch of people doing this just silently, you know. But you know, I think everyone was just worried about it. And so everybody from the shooting, from the writing to the directing to the shooting to when it finally gets into the editing room, you're like, okay, how can I make it jazzy? You know? But, you know, or what can we do different? And not just different because we want to be different, but how do we underscore what this scene is supposed to be about? Like, what is the subtext of this scene that's important to say? Like, is it her attraction to towns? Are we sort of establishing this growing attraction between the two of them? Is it you know, her thinking she's back in the basement when she's playing in Mexico City against Borgov? Like, what are these important, you know, beats? And I think that's what makes it interesting, because it has a dramatic, you know, purpose, and B, you know, it just visually looks different. You're not supposed to really, no one is expecting anyone to understand what's going on the board. And as for that, you know, I mean, we have, you know, the chess consultants, we had 3 of them, and they were very involved from the beginning of the scripts. I mean, I know Bruce Pandolfini and obviously Gary Kasparov helped decide what these games were. So it's sort of a secondary script that was being written. You know, as they went, they decide, oh, this might be a good opening to play during this scene because this is about whatever, you know. And I mean, I don't know what any of that was.
Are you a chess player anyway, or?
No, I think because I wasn't, I think I had to force myself to make it like interesting to me, or like if I understood it, then I felt like other people would understand it.
At least you were the first audience for real this time, like.
Yeah, I was like, oh yeah. I mean, because you can kind of tell when you're looking at what's happening. I'm like, oh, you know, after watching the dailies or watching how it was shot or what they focused on, you know, in the shooting, you're like, okay, this move is important because even though I wouldn't know that, I instinctively know, okay, well, I know that I got to get tighter by the time she moves the bishop here, you know, and that feels like a change when I'm looking at it, and I'm going to play that change up by getting into the coverage or something like that. So it's sort of just a mixture of the fact that I didn't know anything, and then there in the beginning there was a bunch of people who did know stuff. So, but yeah, that's what I would say.
Like anything dancing or something. It's like,
yeah, it's very much like a dance. It's very much like a dance.
And what about, I was really impressed by, obviously that's not really editing, but those scenes of the animation on the bed when she's kind of seeing the game. Was that actually scripted, or did you come up in post with something like that to jazz it up even more, or where did that come from?
I mean, I think, that was originally, when you read the book, she does imagine literally pieces on the ceiling upside down. And I think when Scott wrote it, he wanted to bring that element in. In terms of what they look like, we struggled with, well, I should say, he had to kind of find his way to see, in terms of the look, like the shape. Are they ghostly? Can you see through them? Are they more digital, less? I don't know. We kind of went through many weeks, months of this. And I think in terms of what you're seeing, again, what was interesting is our post supervisor was working with the visual effects team who were creating the animations, and she had to do the research and talk with our consultants about what should be up on the ceiling. What at her point, especially in the first episode, what would little Beth understand about the board that would make sense at that time? Like she wouldn't be playing white. She's always playing black until Scheibel tells her, okay, well, now it's your turn to play white. So there, we kind of had to follow in continuity where her mind would be at. And, Diana, who was our post supervisor, learned all these openings and everything. And we would play chess in the cutting room when we were together, and she would always kick my ass because I wasn't learning like she was. But yeah, that's how we came to know what was up on the board or on the ceiling.
Okay. I could go on forever. I've got more questions, but I'd say, do people have any questions? Because also I'd like to ask at this point, you have other team editors in the Zoom call. I've been informed Stephen O'Connell is here. So
hi, how are you?
If they want to say hello. Hey, hi, hello. Did any of the other teams of editors manage to attend? No, you were the only one.
I think we've got
John Dwelly. Yeah.
Lindsey was it Lindsey Woodward?
Show yourselves.
And Lindsey as well.
Say hello if you wish.
Hi.
Hey.
Hey.
Put my camera on.
Just
my
to
dog.
say hello, a few more faces.
Can I hang up now?
No.
No.
Bastards.
Well, then, shall I ask a bit of a closure question, maybe? So, you know how it's quite hard, as we are in award season and all that, it's quite hard to judge on an edit from if you don't have these talks. Actually, now obviously we're all very much more enlightened. But if you had to say one thing, one challenge, or one, kind of backstage thing about the edit of your show, what would it be that made it, special or different or harder than usual, or anything like that that could say, this is why this edit is so good?
From a special point of view, I think it was Lindsey and Christian and Guy and Amy and Mike and Jason. I think it was very much a team effort, and I think having everyone on hand to come and watch scenes and sequences and have a chat was absolutely amazing. It made it super special.
That's nice to hear. So good. Yeah, your team seems a little dream team, actually.
It was a bit of a dream team, yeah, I have to say.
The Destroyers.
What about the other shows? Free the order now, whoever wants to go first.
I think I don't know exactly, but I suppose really what made it was what happened last year, really. But it's still going on last. I don't think I would have survived without working on Small Axe. I was supposed to finish it last April or May or something, and we didn't finish it till December. And like with the whole, everything that happened, Black Lives Matter movement, all that stuff, it always felt like we were you know, all the timing was right. But you know, that was probably the main thing. Not the edit itself. Made nothing's easy, but no, it was more about what happened really.
Kept you sane.
Yeah.
Nathan or Michelle or Stephen even.
I might chime in. I think there was a real surprise for me with the material and with working with Nathan and Lenny and the rest of the crew, where on this show, it was the element of surprise in the material was quite magical in terms of how extraordinary the ordinary became.
Mm-hmm.
I think I can probably, I'm not speaking out of term, but I think if we had thought that the same people who read the book were going to watch the show, that would have been a success. And if half of them liked it, that'd be fine. But to think that something as simple and that's fundamentally very honest and raw could affect people, I think that was, and a lot of that truth came from the cutting and from that honesty and allowing, you know, when you've got good writing and you've got good performances and directors who enable that, you get a sync when all the elements are in sync, and just allowing that to happen. I think it's nice to hear Chris talking about learning something new, particularly coming from someone like him. It's quite inspiring to hear that we can still do jobs and be surprised and go, wow, I mean, Nathan talking about the timeline and things simplifying a bit, and just, I think that sense of growing is always it's a surprise, but you think that we're constantly supposed to be, our egos are supposed to be topped up all the time, and we're supposed to be kind of confident and but to be open to learning new stuff and new tricks is always as much an adrenaline buzz as anything. Yeah.
True. Michelle?
I don't know. The whole thing was freaking challenging. I mean, I just think it was, what was nice about it while everything was going on is it is a bit of an escape, you know, this world that we created in chess. And, you know, I don't know, we're just shocked that people really took to it. I mean, literally, we didn't think anybody would I mean, you know, we just thought people would, normally when I was telling people what I was working on, they just get really bored halfway through me describing what I was working on. So I mean, and I think maybe that was a challenge. I don't know. I just, you know, I found that this project, not that it wasn't challenging, but I think that what was great about it is being a part of a whole team, you know, with the director and working with the same people again. It's like we were able to really sync up well and kind of, I don't know, make this be the thing that we all had in mind in the beginning. So it's nice to see that being recognized. So
definitely. We have a question from two people actually asking the same questions. What tips do you have for aspiring editors? Both Jeremy and Anna are asking that. If anybody wants to reply.
Oh, could I say one thing? I had a strange, I didn't come up in a normal route. I was never an assistant. I sort of had a strange career. And one thing I noticed since I've had assistants is when I give them the scene, I just want them to go for it. And I feel like sometimes the assistant editor relationship is very formal, or, you know, can be. I suppose for me, it's if you're aspiring, just do it. And anytime you get a chance, go for it and do, and have an opinion on what you're cutting. Don't be polite as an editor, I think. I would say give a strong idea and have a point of view and go for it. That sounds like such a trite, crap, cliche thing to say, but you know, often if I say to an assistant, "Oh, look, here's a scene, give me a cut," and I'll get an assembly back, which is polite and nice and sort of. I just want them. I want more than that. I want them to make a judgment on the material, because then I can see who they are, and I think that's, for me, that's something that served me well. You know, just sort of having a strong opinion on stuff.
I agree. It's like being open to ideas, new ideas, any idea, wherever it comes from, and don't say no. Try anything, because you never know. It might be a better way of doing it. You know, and keep accidents, like happy accidents, are very important. So you make a mistake, sometimes that can be the cut that works. You know, it's like you're saying, isn't it? Don't be too precious.
Yeah.
But also years ago, I remember I had a talk from Jim Clark, who's not around anymore, the editor Jim Clark, and somebody asked that. He said, grow long fingernails. And that was because at the time he said, because you have to pull up every cut. You will have to change every cut in the film from your first cut to the final cut. Every single one will change. So you have to peel every. But I take that. I remember that the whole time. You know, nothing's ever set, really, is it?
No, it's not.
Nothing's.
Quickly, best show of 2020 in your opinion, personal opinions, and also someone actually is asking kind of best TV show ever for you to recommend to someone who doesn't watch a lot of TV. So 2020 or ever.
Oh,
the hardest question. You showed that 2020 had a lot of good shows, so you know you don't want to say your own, but
should we say we're not allowed to say any of the nominated shows?
Let's say that. Okay.
Let's play this like gentlemen.
Yeah.
I really liked. I don't know if it's 2020. The French, the Bureau. I don't know if it finished in 2020. I thought that was good.
Okay.
Not necessarily an all-time best show, but I thought that was great. I watched it in 2020. Does that count?
That I've added that to my list. I haven't even heard of it actually, so good one. Anybody else?
Can't answer it easily.
I certainly remember when I was in college, I used to watch a lot of NYPD Blue.
Yes.
Purely for the editing, I thought it was just quite interesting in its total disrespect for continuity, and it was one of the early examples of that on TV. I thought there's something very liberating about how they used to put that show together. That's going back a while, but like I know we're not allowed to mention our own shows, but I do think the quality of work this year is just incredible. And you know, like Small Axe alone as a series of feature films is amazing achievement. I don't know how you do in that space of time. And Queen's Gambit is groundbreaking, and I May Destroy You, I've never seen anything like it, you know. So
hard to say best, isn't it? You can't say best.
You can't. Yeah.
And even of all time,
I guess kind of the highlight of your 2020. Let's say then. Let's because for me as well, like I watched in 2020 The Get Downs, which I thought was insanely good, but it's not from 2020, so and it.
Faces, the best TV show ever.
All of the panel we've had, I think Stuart, one of our members, has just said, Stuart Davies said, all the nominated shows have been such emblematic bedrocks of the TV experience of 2020, such a rich crop of diverse and brilliant talent. And I just want to echo that I do the admin for BFE, but I also work at the cafe in the daytime, and people come into the cafe and it's sometimes the only people that they see are us who work in there. And every one of these shows has been mentioned to me as something that's got people through this pandemic. Because of the relation that you've had, that human touch. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that these shows have been nominated. And I think it's for those reasons that people have made those connections. And it's been really interesting to hear you all talk tonight about those collaborations you've had, whether it's with your colleagues or with your directors, and having that opportunity to sit down and have the space to talk to each other. And that's what builds the stories. So thank you for sharing those experiences with us, because I know myself that the general public who aren't editors have really fed off of that this year.
And they're all such a, like, I'm very proud to be nominated with you guys, because they're all such different shows. I mean, they really are a rich palette, aren't they? I mean, if you watch just these 4 shows, you'd have a very, very different, broad and sort of different, wonderful experience. You know, I think it's a lovely mixture to be in. You know, we sort of complement each other, I think. You know, it's a strong quartet, isn't it? And they have very different pleasures. It's yeah, congratulations everyone.
No, you wouldn't like to pick a favourite. No way.
No, they really are completely different in every sense, aren't they? It's sort of a really, really amazing list.
Yeah, really. If you have time for another 1 minute, there's one last one from I can't read this name, Eowyn. I read recently that Walter March would take pictures of frames from the rushes and put them up on the wall in order in his edit suite. Do you guys have any kind of out of the ordinary things you do that help your creative process?
Have an afternoon nap. have a siesta.
Yeah.
If you don't know what to do, just have a siesta. Think about it.
Take a shower. Usually taking a shower, for some reason, the bathroom is a place where stuff comes.
Well, now it's easier than working from home, I'm guessing. Do you do that in post-house thing? That's it then. Nothing weird there.
I do the frames of every week. I did that actually. You know, it's funny you mentioned that, because I had this huge board before we had to move out of the offices. It was like a whole wall of all the episodes and like a frame representation of everything, because I knew that we had all these flashbacks that we were probably going to move around, which obviously we did. And you know, we didn't have, that was the one thing I was missing when we were working from home. And we found this other virtual, like in Trello, where you could put the same frames and be able to move them around, but nobody used it. So it's one of those things that you could only, it's great. It was great in person, you know, because people would love to come up to the board and just see where the cut was at that time, you know, or you're just out there, you had a coffee and you're kind of looking, and looking at something sort of sparks some idea, or you realize something that you didn't before by looking at it like that, not in a timeline, or not just singularity on the screen. So I do that.
Yeah, the one thing I do when I was talking about a messy timeline is I tend to, when I'm doing selects, I tend to pile it all into one timeline. So they're piled on top of each other and underneath each other. And quite often I'll play takes where you're hearing multiple versions of the same line all happening at the same time. And I go, that one. And I start to mute stuff. So it's an absolute nightmarish mess. But it helps me. And that kind of opens the door to some of those happy accidents that Chris talks about as well. In that sometimes I see cuts happen underneath the layers. I go, I would never have thought of that. Well done, timeline.
I have to add into that. If you walk into Nathan's room, and you look at his timeline, it looks like the room has been burgled.
Pretty much. Yeah.
I don't know if this is good to admit or not. When I'm assembling a scene, I don't look at the script. I don't read the script or the scene. I don't look at I don't look at the notes. I don't look if there's been rewrites. I basically sort of try to discover it as I'm watching the rushes, and I start putting it together immediately. So and sometimes I'll start going down a path as I'm assembling a scene, which has got nothing to do, which I've just thought of. So because you get what you know what it's about. You know where it's going, because you know you have read the script. You know, at some stage I've read the script. But so sometimes my first assemblies, which are often for me, I'll start trying stuff because I'm sort of discovering it as I'm watching it. I don't ever I don't start by assembling the script. So I sort of do it backwards. So sometimes I'll do this kind of thing, which I might discover stuff in, and then think, fuck, I've got to do it now. But often I'll have discovered stuff that I can park or maybe even incorporate into the actual thing. Because I think it's because I don't know, again, it's that thing Chris said about allowing or trying to create an environment where chaos comes in, like creative chaos. Because if you're starting to discover stuff in any way definitely it's
experiment. It's an experiment, isn't it? So I copy the edit and just call it an experiment or muck around. I muck around with it, and then that becomes the edit, and then you copy it again, and then as long as you've copied it, you've always got it somewhere, haven't you? You can always go back to the boring cut.
Yeah, exactly. Play, isn't it? It's all about like finding I think it's the same for actors. Like you've got to give people some room to play at any stage. It's always useful. It's just a bugger trying to find that time in a TV schedule is often, you know, or any schedule actually. There's never enough time, is there really?
Well, I'd say thank you now. If anybody wants to unmute themselves, say hello, say thank you, as we usually do. If you have any other quick question, but you want to ask them yourself, otherwise we can just cheer and say congratulations for your nomination and good luck. More wine for everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. I'll have my glass of wine now.
Thank you.
Glass of Guinness.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations and thanks everyone.
Thank you very much, guys.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.